Hello, good afternoon, buenas tardes. Welcome again to the afternoon session, which promises to be very interesting. For these papers, researchers are learning about materials and performing technical examination of works of art for various purposes, including to understand Picasso's artworks from specific time periods and his working processes, to understand vulnerabilities and know about actual degradation, and to realize the resulting implications for conservation, transportation and loans, lighting policies, and handlings. Our first talk is by Will Shank, who was trained in conservation and art history in Florence at New York University and the Harvard University Art Museums. He was head of conservation at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art throughout the 1990s. He's been based in Barcelona since 2006, and most of his current projects focus on contemporary outdoor murals and street art. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I need my talk.
It's already on. Just press.
Yeah, just press go. There it is. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be in such august company today, and I want to give a special thanks to Laura Fuster for inviting me to speak. This is the story of two paintings by Pablo Picasso from 1900. The Scène de Rue, alternatively known as Rue de Montmartre, is from the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. It was a gift of Harriet Lane Levy, who was a San Francisco friend of Alice B. Toklas. And the Moulin de la Galette in the Tannhauser collection of the Guggenheim Museum in New York. The Guggenheim painting was historically considered the first painting done by Picasso on his first trip to Paris at age 19. Arriving in October 1900 from Barcelona as a young man full of ambition, eager to make a name for himself in the art world of Paris, his main motivation was to view his painting Last Moments, which famously was painted over and became La Vie, which was then on display at the Spanish Pavilion of the Universal Exposition in the Grand Palais in Paris. Here you see him. You can actually see the original of this upstairs in the exhibition called Picasso Discovers Paris. It shows a self-portrait of Picasso with his friend Manuel Paredes, who arrived 10 days after Picasso himself came with the ill-fated Carlos Casagemas to Paris. One of the young artist's primary destinations was the Moulin de la Galette, a converted windmill that still stands on the hillside of Montmartre. The Moulin was extended in the mid-19th century into a dance hall where the flour mill continued to process flour for the small brown cakes called Galette, hence the name. And it was still a popular destination for Parisians at the turn of the century, although in Picasso's letters home, he observes that it had become a tawdry place for prostitutes. Picasso was aware of this place for several reasons. One of his mentors in Barcelona, the Catalan artist Ramon Casas, had lived in a flat overlooking the dance hall, and it served as inspiration for several of his paintings, as we see here. Young Picasso would have certainly been aware of these paintings and probably seen them in person. But beyond that, the Moulin was a frequent subject for important French painters of the generation before Picasso, most famously Toulouse-Lautrec, around 1889. He painted its interior and its patron several times, and in that same exhibition upstairs, there's a nice gallery at the end of the show where works from Picasso's second trip in 1901 are compared to works by Toulouse-Lautrec of the decade earlier. Vincent van Gogh painted the exterior, and before all of them, and perhaps most importantly, Renoir painted an outdoor scene of the exterior garden in plein air in 1876. So Picasso did this, and the audacity that he shows at age 19 to arrive in Paris and in his first months there to challenge the masters of the generations before him with this scene is downright astonishing. His Moulin is unlike any that preceded it, with its chiaroscuro palette, its sinister overtones, its blurred faces, and the hints of lesbianism in the foreground. Picasso ushered the Moulin and Paris and the art world into the 20th century with this painting. But when exactly did he paint it? We don't know for certain, but it was at some point during his first Paris stay, which lasted almost exactly 2 months from late October until Christmas of 1900. Its immediate sale is well documented, as it's historic as the first work by Picasso to enter a French collection. It was sold to a newspaperman in Toulouse by Bert Weil. This correspondence with friends back home is dated November 1900. It's in the collection here. And it mentions his excitement about the Moulin de la Galette that he's working on. And it says, oh, I have the wrong letter. Anyway, a letter from this very date, I think it's the reverse of this letter, mentions his painting of Moulin de la Galette, and he's very excited about it. But was the Guggenheim painting really his first Paris painting? I was head of conservation at SF MoMA during the time that this research took place. Our early work by Picasso was usually on display, and minimal technical records existed about its structure. Rue de Montmartre is a low-key, quiet painting of modest dimensions, a competent but not exciting early work from the same period as the Moulin, autumn 1900. It shows 3 figures facing away from the viewer, surrounded by a townscape of Montmartre, apparently at sundown. Routine examination of the painting in the conservation studio did not reveal anything extraordinary to the painting's conservators, but there had long been suspicions that something lay beneath the visible composition. Raking light in particular revealed texture irregularities that gave away brushwork clearly unrelated to the composition of Rue de Montmartre. It's more obvious here in these details where you see the swirling paintwork around the head of the man. And also around the head of the woman where something clearly is going on beneath the surface that's been obliterated. Ultraviolet fluorescence revealed some areas of retouching. It suggested the presence of a natural resin varnish layer, but not much deeper information. But even in normal light, with nothing but simple visual examination, wide cracks could be noted across much of the surface, and some of them were wide enough to reveal unrelated colors through the cracks. So these visual clues, many of them made available to us because of the extensive pattern of drying cracks, were tantalizing, but it wasn't a priority for us to delve deeper into the structure of Scène de Rue. You see some of the typical drying cracks and the hints of other colors beneath. That all changed, and we've seen this picture before today, when the National Gallery of Art requested the painting for their 1997 exhibition. Along with all the loan works, the conservation team in Washington, Anne Honingswald in particular, took a closer look at the SF MoMA painting. Infrared reflectography gave more tantalizing clues about another composition, especially this ghostly shape between the figures. I don't know how do I do the laser?
It's the top one.
Up on here? Oh, this one. Oh, got it, thank you. This ghostly figure, which was not visible in normal light, as you see. But it was the radiograph made by the National Gallery that began to reveal the astonishing hidden composition and to suggest its completeness. And Honingswald, who was their conservator of paintings of this period of paintings of the National Gallery, broke this news to us that an extraordinarily complete composition lay beneath the SF MoMA painting. When the radiograph was adjusted to eliminate the stretcher bars, I did that already, got rid of the stretcher bars, the scene became easier to read, and further digital enhancement made the figures stand out in chiaroscuro. Let's just look at that again for a minute. So with this tantalizing news, we at SF MoMA began to look more in earnest at Rue de Montmartre and began removing the surface grime. Here you see Paula de Cristofaro at work doing a surface cleaning and having a closer look at the cracks microscopically to see what we could learn about the lower layer of paint. We felt certain that given the opportunity, we could reveal the hidden image in color, so obvious in the black and white radiograph. It took a few years, but thanks to Paul Schwartzbaum, who was then head of conservation of the Guggenheim Museums, I was invited to curate an exhibition of the hidden painting in Bilbao. The assumption was that the SF MoMA team would be able to produce a color version of the work to present to the public by the time of the opening. Well, this was a big assumption. It would turn out to be quite a challenge and took us quite a few months of intense work. And we began by, with this target date in mind, there was an IIC meeting in Bilbao, some of you may recall, and this was the conservation-related exhibition at that time. So we began by superimposing one painting upon the other digitally to see what exactly lined up. And I think you see the figure of the man was somewhat dictated by the figures in profile below him. So piece by piece, this is Tim Svenonius, who was the wizard of computer graphics who did all of this with Photoshop. And bit by bit, with the eyedropper tool, we were able to lift the colors out of the cracks, having expanded them digitally pixel by pixel and applying them to the corresponding image beneath. And although some guesswork was required, let me back up a minute. So we started to come up with some really unexpected colors, and it was really helpful to have other paintings of similar subject matter from similar periods as reference points, because we were getting yellow faces on the people in the nightclub and greenish cast to the flesh, and we thought this can't be right. But in fact, this is a scene of a similar subject from the following year. And here you see the reconstructed similar figures with some unexpected flesh tones. Bit by bit it came together. And finally, although we did some extrapolating, we feel that at least 85, if not 90% of it actually represents Picasso's original palette on this painting. We did a bit of toning at the end. The foreground seems to have been left unfinished. And the background as well, there are only suggestions of an interior space. So, who do we see in this painting? What exactly is this painting about? The first figure that stands out is the large woman in black, who dominates the left edge of the composition. She faces the viewer, but looks over her shoulder toward the action of the rest of the painting. Maria Teresa Ocaña, who was the director of this museum when I began my research, identified the woman in black as La Celestina, a figure from Spanish literature who was part witch, part procuress, and who was portrayed by Picasso in other paintings like this Blue Period work from 1903. Young Picasso had created a similar composition. This is a piece called El Divan, which is here in this museum, with a procuress on the left-hand side of a seduction scene in a Barcelona brothel. This is a pastel work from 1899. This also was a connection made by La Directora Ocaña during my research. The placement of the woman in black, set apart from and observing the action, echoes her placement in the brothel scene. Picasso gave some significance to this figure because when he returned to the dance hall theme in the Guggenheim painting, we also see a woman in black with a blue ribbon or another decoration on her black headgear, although she's more fully incorporated into the action of the scene. And in the final version of the Moulin, her figure forms a kind of triangle with her elbow sticking into the composition, similar to the one in the hidden painting. Why was this Celestina-like figure removed from the final version of the Moulin? Perhaps Picasso was advised, or he discovered himself, that she was too Spanish a reference for a French audience, and that she didn't belong in the Moulin de la Galette. The can-can dancers themselves are removed from the final version, which instead makes the dancers out of the paying guests. And they're not doing a can-can, but they're doing a sophisticated Argentine dance that was popular in that era. And yet, Picasso liked the can-can theme, and he devoted a single canvas to their dance on his second trip to Paris. In this version, he's thrown himself right into the petticoats of the dancers and focused on the part that had been the right side of his earlier composition. And yet, he painted over all these people. Why did he paint over them? Why would Picasso hide a painting? This was the question that we asked ourselves, and we have a couple theories about it. First of all, if you just look at the size, the final Moulin is about 4 times as big as his original version. So I think he wanted to make a larger statement. And here you see them side by side when we installed them in the Guggenheim in Bilbao. That's the San Francisco painting at the in the background and the Guggenheim painting in the foreground. So he took the small canvas and he painted it over with something that he thought would sell more quickly. What's interesting is he did not obliterate the early image, and this is a series of fade in, fade out from one to the other. This is what was there before, and he painted directly over it. There was no indication of his having obliterated the first image, but he painted one directly on top of the other. So he painted this instead. He was being advised by his gallerist, Pere Magnac, to paint local scenes that would be easy to sell. And although he obliterated the painting, the dance hall imagery stayed with him. Oh, I just show this as an example. We've seen him playing this game where he leaves clues on the surface of what lays beneath, and this is the famous Henri Clouzot Picasso Mystère Picasso from 1956, where he changes a fish into a rooster, and he did the same sort of game so that we could see the evolution of the things on the surface. So in the final version, he does this simple, quiet Montmartre scene, and this was the type of thing that he was drawing every day in his carnet while walking around Paris. This is a facsimile. I didn't wear gloves. I was allowed to handle this in the registrar's office here in the museum. And these were obviously the type of inspiration for the final scene. Interesting, Anne Baldassari, who was then at the Musée Picasso in Paris, when I was doing the research, pointed out this photograph that they had in their archive in Paris, and we see young Picasso with Pere Magnac, who was his gallerist, and the visiting Catalan artist Torres Fuster. And behind them on the wall, that's what's interesting, and it's a little blurry when you blow it up this big, is something that looks like a dance hall scene. And we couldn't identify if there was actually a sketch by Picasso or whether it was something clipped out of a magazine. But this was 1901, and he still had this theme in his head. So is it grave robbing to bring back a painting that the artist decided to obliterate? I don't think so. We didn't recreate it physically. We never actually painted another Picasso. We can't be accused of forgery. So it's only a digital image, and when it was presented in Bilbao and then in San Francisco, the digital image was presented as a transparency. So I think actually it adds to a body of knowledge about this the hidden image and this kind of theme that interested Picasso on his first 2 trips to Paris, the nightclub scene. And we brought these people back to life. This ghost turned out to be this woman in the orange dress who responded to infrared. This swirled bit was the hat of that dancer. The red through the cracks was the bright red jacket of that dancer. And click to download. So besides the people I thanked in the talk, I want to thank the staff of the Guggenheim Bilbao, especially Daniel Vega, the deputy director who made this happen in Bilbao, and the conservation education departments at SF MoMA, my colleagues at the National Gallery, and all of you for listening. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for those wonderful images. We have time for one question. Does anybody have a question? Yes.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I was just wondering about the what you call drawing cracks. Are they all drawing cracks, or were there losses also? And it seemed like they were a bit different.
Yeah, there were certainly mechanical cracks as well, but the ones that were really wide and in the classic look of a drying crack, they were wide and they were curved. They were not sharp. And it was quite clear that the reason, I forgot to mention the whole reason, that we have the drying cracks is because the time was so short in this first 2-month period that he certainly painted over it while it was wet and before the oil had fully oxidized on the lower painting, which is the explanation of the drying cracks.
Thank you.
Thank you.